All right, that all worked. And then I'm so not used to, okay, I'm going to start letting people in. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to wait a few minutes till we get everybody joined on. Feel free to say hi in the chat and where you're joining from so we know as we wait to get started. Oh, we've got a few people from Timmins. Hello. Welcome. We'll just wait one more minute and then we'll get started right at 7 o'clock. Because I know Kim's got lots to share with us. All right, I think we will get started. I think I've got everyone in from the waiting room at the moment, and I'll continue to add people as we get going. Welcome everyone for joining us on this sunny night. Still have the sunshine out. We're very excited to welcome Kim. I will let you know just before we get started that we are recording this session. So feel free if you need to change your name or have your camera off, that's totally fine. And that way we can share this out with people that were unable to join us tonight. You can go to the next slide, Angeline. So we're going to start with our land acknowledgement. OMLTA reconnaît que les activités de notre organisation et celles de nos membres se réalisent sur des terres des Autochtones. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir travailler et vivre sur ces territoires. Nous remercions les peuples Métis, Inuits et des Premières Nations qui prennent soin de ces territoires depuis des temps immémoriaux et qui continuent de contribuer à la force de l'Ontario et des collectivités de la province. Nous voulons également reconnaître et faire honneur à la pérennité de la présence des Premières Nations, des Métis et des Inuits qui vivent sur ce territoire depuis ces temps immémoriaux. And just wanted to acknowledge that part of a land acknowledgement is also recognizing the responsibility that we have to take action. So just wanted to show that one of the actions that OMLTA is taking is that during our conference that we held just a couple of weeks ago, we took $2 from all the profits to go towards this organization, Inspire. Highly recommend checking out what they do. It's a charity that invests in the education of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. And now I'd like to take a moment to welcome Kim Lockhart. Kim is a French immersion classroom and special education teacher in Kingston, Ontario. She holds a Master of Education degree with a research focus on evidence-based practices to support second language learners with reading difficulties. Kim has her Orton Gillingham Classroom Educator Certificate, Series Structured Literacy Classroom Teacher Certification, and was a structured literacy coach for the International Dyslexia Association of Ontario for 2 years. She has presented to the Ontario Minister of Education and his team and was hired as a content contributor for the new Ontario language curriculum. Kim is currently teaching at Vancouver Island University Faculty of Education in the Literacy, Language, and Learning graduate program. She is passionate about the science of reading and strives to empower educators, parents, and caregivers to be more knowledgeable, stronger advocates for all children's rights to read across Canada. And without further ado, I welcome you, Kim, and we'll pass the screen sharing over to you.
I love it. I love the screen share rather than pass the mic over. Okay, so hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Do not look at my screen. It's a little messy, but there we go. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. That was a fantastic introduction. I'm very humbled. I also want to just clarify that my title did not fit on my first slide. So when OMLTA asked me for a title, I thought, oh yes, I'm going to cover this and this and this and this and this. And I had the longest title in the world. So the title that you saw on the promo posters that went out, this is that presentation. I just couldn't fit it all on my slides. So we are covering the same amount of material. The presentation that I'm going to share with you tonight is my first time presenting this particular presentation. It is going to be based on the book written by Dr. Elsa Cardenas-Hagan. She wrote Literacy Foundations for English Learners. And I want to share with you tonight how I've used this book over the last 2.5 years to inform my teaching practice in the FSL, French Second Language classroom. All right, so we have a bit of a packed agenda, as I typically do. As I said, I've never presented this particular presentation before, so I am going to do my best to keep it at exactly 60 minutes. I'm going to give you a little introduction to myself and what brought me along my science of reading learning journey. I'm going to explain a little bit what science of reading for second language learners means, and we're going to take a deep dive and look particularly at the areas of oral language, word reading or decoding strategies, language comprehension, which is the ability to understand spoken language, and take a look at writing and how we can get our second language learners to be proficient writers as well as proficient readers. And then I'm going to leave you with some next steps because I know an hour isn't nearly enough time to dig into everything that we need to talk about. So I have been teaching for over 20 years. I started my teaching career actually in France, where I taught ESL learners as part of my concurrent education degree. And then I went on to teach at the Canadian International School of Singapore. And then I went to Mexico, where I taught at an American International School for 3 years. So the first 4 years of my teaching career were teaching ELL learners. And I really wish that I had had this book back in 1996 when I started teaching. I am currently working as a French immersion classroom teacher and reading remediation teacher at a French immersion school in Kingston, Ontario. I started to do a deep dive into the reading research when I took on the role of SST, or special education teacher or student support teacher. Different title in different school boards and school districts. Essentially, what I wanted to understand were what are the skills and strategies that second language learners need that may differ or may need more time than our monolingual students. So I did my Master's of Education and I learned the reading research. And then I went on to do my Orton Gillingham training, which really helped me better understand how that research transfers into the classroom, because the research is often done in a very controlled context. Whereas we know that the classroom setting is not always as neat and tidy, and it can be a very messy setting. So I wanted to learn how I can use that reading research and what does it look like in the classroom setting. I have most recently been hired as the content contributor for the most recent language curriculum here in Ontario, which was implemented in September. That is the language curriculum for English learners. It is not for French immersion students, but our FSL document does have some great parts to it, but I do base my teaching practice on the science of reading or the reading research. I have been a literacy coach for 2 years for the International Dyslexia Association of Ontario. And as Amy kindly said, I have recently started teaching at the Vancouver Island University in beautiful Nanaimo, BC, virtually. I'm still in Kingston. I want to share some of the research with you that Dr. Cardenas-Hagan shared in her book. One of the first things that she pointed out was directly making reference to the National Reading Panel. And this was a report that came out in the year 2000, and it identified 5 areas that are essential for reading proficiency. Now, those 5 areas that were identified by the NRP included phonemic awareness, phonics, oral reading fluency, or for short, we say often reading fluency, vocabulary development, and reading comprehension. And sometimes you may have seen in the past the 5 pillars, and those are often referred to as the 5 pillars of reading. Dr. Cardenas-Hagan says on page 40, the same 5 components of literacy instruction that are important for monolingual English speakers are essential for second language learners with some slight adjustments. So if we look at the National Reading Panel, they do highlight those 5 areas of the reading process. But one thing that they didn't highlight was the need for oral language skills. And that really is like the bedrock or the foundation on which all of these other skills are embedded. The Reading League created a Science of Reading defining guide back in 2022, only 2 years ago. And they too highlighted how all readers, monolingual learners, second language learners, and multilingual learners must have the same foundational reading skills as monolingual learners. They say in their defining guide that all proficient readers must master the same concepts in order to learn to read. However, it is important to provide students with linguistic differences a focused attention on oral language development. So again, making reference to the National Reading Panel, they highlighted those 5 areas of the reading process. And the Reading League acknowledges that second and multi-language learners also need support and instruction on those 5 pillars, but they also need that 6th pillar, which is that oral language foundation, because many of our multilingual learners, our French immersion students, are not coming into the classroom with those same oral language skills, those spoken language skills that their monolingual peers have because they've picked it up at home. So our students who are learning the language of instruction that is the same as the language they speak at home are coming in at a bit of an advantage because they already have a bit of an oral language foundation. Whereas our French immersion students, we need to build that foundation. This is further reiterated in Dr. Cardenas-Hagan's book. She says that additional language learners benefit from reading instruction that includes phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and text comprehension. Those are the same 5 pillars mentioned by the National Reading Panel. Adjustments are necessary, however. One of the major adjustments includes a focus on oral language proficiency, which is overlooked during instruction, and that's found on page 38. So one of the key differences found between our French immersion students and monolingual learners is that lack of oral language in French. So I created a bit of a comparison, learning to read in English versus learning to read in French. When you learn to read in English, considering if you speak English at home, this is where monolingual learners are learning in the language of instruction. They need phonemic awareness, phonics, decoding words, spelling, vocabulary, background knowledge, fluency, comprehension, and writing structures. Our French immersion students, they need the same. But the key difference is, and this is research that came from some fairly old studies, our English-speaking students who attend a school where the language of instruction is in English come to school with between 5,000 and 10,000 words in their mental dictionary. And the fancy word for mental dictionary is lexicon. So they are coming to school with up to 10,000 words already in their brain dictionary. Whereas our French immersion students, regardless if they start in JK or SK or grade 1, may have some oral language skills in English, but they don't have any oral language skills in French, meaning they don't understand spoken instructions. When you say vas-y au tapis, in English, if you say, please go to the carpet, they may not do it in a very structured form, but they know what you're saying. Whereas our French immersion students, when we say vas-y au tapis, they of course don't have that receptive language. And same with their expressive language. They are not coming to school with those expressive language skills to express their thoughts and feelings. So I'm going to share 7 key takeaways with you during this presentation, and all of these key takeaways are taken directly from the book. The first key takeaway is that oral language is the bedrock of reading development. This infographic has come from Pamela Snow. It did not come from Dr. Cardenas-Hagan. But this infographic by Dr. Pamela Snow shows how we need that solid foundation on which those other skills are built. Dr. Cardenas-Hagan says, oral language is a basic skill that is necessary for a higher form of language, which includes reading and writing. A student must have strong oral language skills in order to achieve high levels of literacy skills. Reading is a language-based skill that requires strong oral language skills, and that's found on page 16. Furthermore, there is other research to indicate that students with strong oral language skills tend to be strong readers and writers, whereas students who come to school with weaker oral language skills tend to have more difficulty with reading and writing. So oral language truly can be a predictor of reading and writing proficiency. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can change the trajectory. Just because a child comes with weak oral language skills, we need to beef that up. It is up to us to teach them those oral language skills to give them the foundation for later reading and writing. So this is the part that I love. This is going to be showing you some of the research and then what that looks like in my classroom practice. So again, Dr. Cardenas-Hagan says that every language consists of sounds. Phonology is related to the language's form. Students must be able to process and produce sounds to produce oral language. This is not something that I was trained in Teachers College. So I've had to learn through a lot of assistance, a lot of consultation, and a lot of support and help from my speech and language pathologist. Language, spoken language, is the foundation of reading and writing. However, I was never trained in this area of literacy. So I have learned to use simple tools and strategies that have drastically and significantly helped my students' oral language skills. And first and foremost is articulation. Articulation is the ability to pronounce a sound correctly. So when we talk about articulation, it is the production of a speech sound, whereas language is a more complex. It is language structures, grammar, sentence structures, and many other components that we'll get into. So to help my students with their articulation, I simply have bought a few mirrors from Dollarama. And I use the mirrors to have the students look at the position of their mouth, lips, teeth, and tongue. In French, we have sounds that do not exist in English. And so often these sounds are new. The student may be able to hear the sound, but just because they can hear the sound does not mean they are able to produce this sound. So by showing students the position of my lips, my teeth, and my tongue, And sometimes the voicing of the throat, we are able to better help show students how to produce that sound. So I also bring to their attention that there are different sounds in phonology. We have something called stretchy or continuous sounds that we can hold for several seconds, such as s, l. There are many more continuous or stretchy sounds than we have stop sounds, which are sounds that just sort of come out of our mouth and stop abruptly. These such sounds are b, d, t. And so we have to make sure that we are teaching students to articulate those sounds cleanly and crisply so that when they go to apply these sounds to the letters, they are saying them correctly and it's not going to interfere with their ability to decode. For example, I sometimes have heard students say, that's the letter B, ça c'est la lettre B, la lettre B fait le son B. But then we're changing that stop sound to a continuous sound, B, and that's not its cleanest form, it's B. It's a stop sound, so it needs to stop immediately. We also want to teach students voiced and unvoiced sounds, and we can do so by touching our throats and see if our vocal cords are vibrating. For example, the sound V is a voiced sound, or en français, c'est voiser, V, and its sister or brother sound is F, which is the same mouth position, but without the vibration of the vocal cords. So when we are talking about oral language, that was articulation, but when talking about oral language, we want to make sure that our students have that speaking fluency, as well as the ability to articulate individual speech sounds. They need to be able to construct and to be able to speak in a fluent manner. So if they can speak in a fluent manner, we want them to start reading in a fluent manner. Students who have difficulty speaking fluently are more at risk for having difficulties with reading fluently. So one way that several strategies that are mentioned in the book include daily repetition and rehearsal. Daily. This is something that I start every single language and literacy lesson with, is oral language practice. Using gestures and visuals will help put those sounds and create meaning to those words and to those sounds. So we use a lot of gestures, we use a lot of visuals, I use a lot of posters, and I do a lot of my very artistic drawings on the whiteboard, which they like to tease me for. We want to show them different models of oral language, and we can use, I'm going to get into this later, about sentence stems and sentence starters, and showing them ways that we can create sentences with words. And of course, we want to give them immediate feedback. As both the classroom teacher as well as the special education teacher, I know first and foremost that it is very hard, it is extremely difficult to change old habits. And so I often give my students immediate feedback to try and prevent those habits from forming. One of the examples is I have a lot of students in my French immersion school who will say j'ai un chien. And if they've been practicing j'ai un chien, j'ai un crayon, j'ai for several years, it's going to take a lot more than 15 minutes a day, 3 days a week for me to undo that. So beginning as early as possible, I try to model those correct forms, model those correct sentence structures, and help them to recognize that in English, it might be I have a dog, and they're trying to model the same sentence structure by saying j'ai un chien, whereas what they don't understand is j'ai is actually a contraction. So we can explain that to them, and that might help break that habit and form good habits. This is just, so research to practice. This is a picture of us singing our morning routine song. We do lots of gestures. It keeps the kids engaged. And with regular repetition and practice, and we also practice it in different voices, which keeps it from getting too stagnant. I'll be honest, they never get tired of these songs. I've been singing 5 of the same songs since September, and they look forward to it. They like that routine, they enjoy that predictability, and they enjoy being able to see themselves improve as students speaking a second language too. So In September, it was a very quiet classroom singing, and now we have almost all 24 students singing at the same time. So it really has been a wonderful addition to our routine. Another piece of research says that reading aloud to students and having them retell information will expand the students' background knowledge, vocabulary, and oral language. Unfortunately, there have been some myths with regards to reading aloud. Reading aloud to students is shown to be one of the most beneficial, effective ways to grow students' content knowledge of a certain subject, to grow their vocabulary and their understanding of word meanings, and building their oral language skills and hearing those sentence structures and hearing the intonation of the voice change. The beauty of read alouds too is that we are able to give our students access to books that may be at a higher level than they have access to when reading independently. So we definitely want to make sure that we are using rich, culturally responsive read alouds to help build students' vocabulary and background knowledge, but also take time to explain that vocabulary ahead of time. This is one book that I have read with my grade 3 students. It's a beautiful story, culturally very rich story, but there are many different vocabulary words that are unfamiliar to them. So I sometimes use paint strips to outline some of the new vocabulary or to build synonyms. And we talk about that vocabulary. So when we come to that vocabulary word in the text, it can help them glean meaning from the story. Takeaway number 2. Phonemic awareness skills are cross-linguistic. And most people probably know or understand that cross-linguistic means transfers across languages. So when we say phonemic awareness skills are cross-linguistic, practicing these skills at home in the home language, whether it be Spanish, Italian, English, should transfer over into their phonemic awareness abilities in French. Dr. Cardenas-Hagan says, phonemic awareness skills are foundational for reading in alphabetic and non-alphabetic languages. Processing and producing sounds is a necessary skill for manipulating and segmenting sounds across many languages. There appears to be cross-language transfer of phonological awareness skills. Students who have the capacity to process and manipulate sounds in a first language are likely to do it in the second language. So when we're talking about phonemic awareness skills, we really are focusing on sound isolation. Par exemple, le mot bateau. Qu'est-ce que c'est le premier son? C'est B. That clean B. Qu'est-ce que c'est le premier son dans le mot manteau? C'est If I did this in English, what is the first sound you hear in the word boat? It would be B. So regardless of the vocabulary word, we need students to be able to isolate those speech sounds. The vocabulary word, this is not a vocabulary lesson. We simply want them to discriminate or tune their ear into that first sound, whether it be boat or bateau. Another important phonemic awareness skill is the ability to blend sounds together. Of course, blending is the precursor to decoding when they're looking at those letters. We need students to be able to blend sounds together, such as b, at, o, bateau. We also need students to be able to discriminate all of the sounds in a word because that will help them with their encoding or spelling skills. Spelling relies very, very heavily on the ability to segment words into their individual phonemes or their individual sounds. Par exemple, if I have the word bateau, we're thinking only of the sounds, not of the spelling. The sounds in the word bateau sont b, a, t, o. Il y a 4 sons. Students must be able to discriminate and hear those individual sounds so they can match the grapheme or the letter or letters to those phonemes. The more complex phonemic awareness skills, I don't spend a lot of time on those because primarily I need my students to be able to blend and segment. Research to practice. A student's ability to process and manipulate a phoneme or sound predicts future reading abilities. Tasks at this level include blending individual sounds together to form a word and segmenting a word into its individual sounds. So this is in the classroom, and I usually use this as a very quick 1 to 1.5 minute warm-up activity. And I call this mot mystère. So I just want to get the students' attention. I want them to start thinking about sounds in words. I don't spend much time on this, but I use this to hook them and to capture their attention. And I would play mot mystère. I would start with, mes amis, qu'est-ce que c'est le mot mystère? Ah, and they would hopefully blend it together and say, ma. Oui, le mot mystère, c'est ma. Qu'est-ce que c'est le mot mystère? B-at-o. B-at-o. Bateau. Sometimes for our younger students who have not yet developed that auditory discrimination, the b can be hard to hear or discriminate because it is a stop sound. So if students are having a hard time with words that start with stop sounds, such as bateau, you might want to start with sh, at, o. And starting a word with a continuous or stretchy sound is going to be much easier to hear or discriminate from those quick stop sounds. As I said, segmenting is hugely important for spelling. Phonemic awareness activities can be complicated for our second language learners because students have to recognize sounds that may not exist in their native or home language. Instructionally, it is very important for teachers to determine some of the language's similarities and differences to ensure that instruction is placed on the sounds that do not exist in the first language. So when we are starting our segmenting activities, I always start with sounds that exist in both languages, such as l, f, v. But then sometimes we get to more unique sounds that are unique to the French language. And one of the more tricky sounds can be ny, the ny, such as GN or JN, that does not exist in English. So that can be sometimes difficult. So we want to feel our voice ny and see if we can feel that vibration. And we also want to see what our mouth is doing in the mirror because that is not a sound that they may have seen before and certainly not a sound they have heard before. So one way that I practice segmenting is using an abacus. These, I'll be honest, were not being used very frequently for math lessons. So I confiscated them from a lot of classrooms in our school when they were not using them, and I use them for segmenting. And so I would start with a very simple word with two phonemes or two sounds, such as sa. And I'd say, okay, watch me. This is the word, ça c'est le mot sa. Regarde-moi. Fais-le avec moi, and we would do it together. Maintenant fais-le toute seule. So I would always use that I do, we do, you do, which is that explicit instruction and gradual release of responsibility. You do want to incorporate some of those new sounds, such as ny, to bring students awareness to it. Also, I have found that sometimes there are graphemes, such as OI that says wa en français, that can be difficult for students to blend depending on the position of their mouth. For example, my students can say moi, toi, but they have a very hard time with loi because it requires the mouth to move quite quickly. We start with the tongue between the teeth, and then we have to make two sounds for the sound wa. So that can be quite challenging. So by slowing it down and then gradually speeding up, it may help. It can also help if we start with a segmenting activity. Répète le mot loi, loi, regarde-moi. Loi, because we want to model that the wa represents one phoneme. Takeaway number 3 from the book, phonics. Second language learners must learn 2 sets of code to read and spell. So there is a myth that learning a second language is easy and natural. And I would argue that learning to speak and understand another language can be quite a natural process. Our brains are wired for spoken language. So when I lived in Mexico, I learned to speak and eventually understand Spanish quite well. However, to learn how to read and write and spell, that requires knowledge of the letter sound correspondence that is unique to that language. Dr. Cardenas-Hagan says, phonics is a method of instruction that teaches students how to link the letter or symbol, or grapheme as we may say, to its corresponding sound and blend them together to read words. The components of phonics that she covers in the book are letter recognition, graphophonemic knowledge, decoding, morphological awareness. I created this Venn diagram to give a little bit of an overview of how students have to know those two sets of code and how taxing that can be. This is not a complete list, so please just be aware that this is just to make a point and to show how much code students need to learn if they are going to be both bilingual and biliterate in both English and French. So let's take a look at some of those more specific strategies for phonics. I like this quote because Dr. Wade Woolley was actually one of my professors at Queen's when I was doing my master's. And Dr. Siegel is a very important Canadian researcher who was heavily involved in the OHRC's Right to Read report. So it's wonderful that they were cited in Dr. Cardenas-Hagan's book. Letter identification in kindergarten is a predictor for decoding skills in first grade amongst groups of emergent readers. So by letter identification, that's saying the letter name. Ways that I teach letter names are singing the alphabet song. That's part of our daily routine, singing that alphabet song. An alphabet rainbow map, knowing where the letters are in the alphabet, similar to a number line. We can have an alphabet line. Does the letter Y come towards the beginning or towards the end of the rainbow? And helping students know the order of the letters, but also can they name the letters when the letters are not in order. And then finally, the letter naming bingo. And I play this with my kindergarten students in the whole class setting. And then those ones who have difficulties with the letter naming, they may confuse the letter names with English. I pull them aside in small groups in the play-based setting, and we play a little game with those students who just need a double dose or an extra repetition of those letter names. So for example, everyone would receive un jeton et une carte. Et sur la carte, il y a beaucoup de lettres. Je vais dire, OK, je vois la lettre P. Où est la lettre P? And I always have them repeat the letter name because I don't want to be the only one saying the letter name. So I would say P, and as they put the jeton on the letter P, they have to say P. And then finally, at the end, when they say bingo, they have to name the letters. It's much easier for me to say Q than for them to look at the letter and remember the letter name. So again, this is really involving the receptive and expressive language skills. I don't want to be the only one saying, OK, mes amis, où est la lettre W? And they have to find W. And then when they win bingo, they have to say each letter name for a prize. Graphophonemic knowledge includes activities that help students progress from letter knowledge to letter sound associations. So this is the decoding piece. This is what we want students to be able to do. We want them to be able to look at a letter and say its corresponding phoneme or phonemes, plural. One of the activities that I love in Dr. Cardenas's book is she has a script with specific recommendations and strategies for classroom practice. I just change the words and I just change it so that the script is translated into French. She would say, look in a mirror as you determine how to produce each sound. You used your lips. And then I would say, touche ta gorge. Est-ce que tu sens les vibrations? Oui, pour la lettre V. So again, it's bringing students' attention, but it's matching those speech sounds to their grapheme or to their letter. So having that letter sound correspondence is essential, but also making sure that they are saying that pronunciation correctly as well. Decoding. Decoding words is the foundation on which many higher level reading skills build, including accuracy, fluency, and of course, our ultimate goal, reading comprehension. A solid knowledge base of letter sound correspondences, along with ample practice to build automaticity, are crucial for students to become proficient at decoding. And I love that Dr. Cardenas really focused on that regular practice, because it's not going to happen with 1 or 2 days of practice. Students may need 4 or 5 repetitions. They may need 20 or 50 repetitions. So weaving those skills and those letter sounds into daily practice is beneficial for all students, but essential for some students. This is one of my little friends in a JK classroom this year in my French immersion kindergarten classroom. We had gone through our scope and sequence for letter sound correspondences, and by Christmas, or by the winter break, he was already reading these French sentences. And of course, he's not just decoding them, but we want to talk about the meaning of those words too. And we love to use the names of friends in our classroom. And thankfully, we do have some friends with decodable names, such as Leah, Mia, and my daughter's name is Mia, and her abbreviation is Mimi. So we can get kids decoding as early as JK with explicit systematic instruction of letter sound correspondences. Another strategy to help with phonics is morphology. And if you're unfamiliar with the term morphology, we're looking at the units of meaning in words. Frequently, we're thinking about affixes, such as prefixes, suffixes, and those base words. Teaching morphemes, or those affixes, will assist students in reading words with accuracy and understanding the word meanings. Morphemes can either exist as a prefix, root, base word, or a suffix, which is the ending. A prefix is the morpheme that is added to a root to change its meaning, and many prefixes are common across languages in their form and meaning. So again, Dr. Cardenas-Hagan emphasizes the transfer of some forms of language between the home language and the second language. There are many different morphemes that exist in English that also exist in French. One of the examples is re, and re, ça veut dire encore. And so if a student comes across a new word, par exemple, retourner, ou revenir, ou refaire ton travail, we can bring their attention to the fact that re, ça veut dire encore. So, donc, ça veut dire on doit le faire encore. And a great resource that I often make reference to is Morphograph. This is one of the sister documents to Alphograph that was developed by Michel Minor-Corriveau and Alex-André Mador. And this is a great reference, particularly if you are new to the area of morphology. I know that there are a lot of resources out there for English teachers or teachers of English language classrooms, such as Morphemes for Little Ones and Morpheme Magic. Thankfully, we do have some great resources for our French immersion and FSL students, and so I highly recommend Morphograph. Phonics also includes spelling. Now, Dr. Cardenas-Hagan organized her book a little bit differently than I've organized this presentation. She left spelling for one of the last chapters. But when I teach spelling, I always teach it with my phonics and my decoding. There is a quote by Melissa and Lori Love Literacy that says, encoding and decoding are two sides of the same coin, meaning that they strengthen one another. That letter sound correspondence is sound letter correspondence. And by teaching students to hear the sound and match that sound to its grapheme or letter, will strengthen that letter sound correspondence, which ultimately will strengthen their decoding abilities. So we want to make sure that we are not teaching decoding and spelling in isolation or in silos. They should be taught together. So the way I do that, I do it through explicit systematic instruction of letter sound correspondences. If I am teaching a new letter sound correspondence, par exemple, ça c'est le son wa, OI fait le son wa, I would have the students read that in syllables and decodable words. Par exemple, le son wa comme toi, moi, soi, voir, avoir, savoir, and immediately I would turn to our whiteboards and dry erase markers and have them start writing it. I am not going to make that for Friday afternoon dictée. I want them to look at that letter, those letters in this case, that grapheme, and know the phoneme, but they must do the reverse as well. Explicit systematic spelling instruction of patterns and rules reinforces reading proficiency by improving sounds and letter patterns. And this is from Dr. Marilyn Jagger Adams. And it goes on to say, these ultimately facilitate learning word pronunciation and word meanings. And so I'm going to do a very quick demonstration of how I teach spelling to reinforce that letter sound correspondence. I'm going to take a very simple word. For example, le mot mal. I would say, okay, mes amis, tout le monde répète mal. And they would repeat it. And I do lots of hand gestures so they know, okay, it's your turn. Mal. And then my students would say mal, because I want to make sure they're not saying nal or something else that may sound like I want to make sure they are articulating, again, coming back to that oral language piece, they are articulating that speech sound correctly. If they're saying it incorrectly, they may write the incorrect grapheme. So I would say, okay, regarde-moi. This is the modeling piece. Regarde-moi. I do it faster. Il y a combien de cents? Il y a 300. Fais-le avec moi. Oui, il y a 300. So for each one of the sounds, I will write une ligne. Quelle lettre fait le son? Oui, ça c'est la lettre M. Quelle lettre fait le son? A. Oui, la lettre A fait le son A. Again, letter naming is very important. It is surprising how many students still don't know their letter names. And when you go to spell, you say, oh, what letter says we want them to know that the letter name is M. What is, quelle lettre fait le son? L. Ça, c'est la lettre L. Now, this one's fairly easy because M and L are the same in both English and French. But when we get to words such as, now I'm going off topic, but many students may not know or may confuse the letter G and say J, mais ça c'est la lettre J. So again, that letter naming is important. We want to make sure that they can do that. After we segment the word, attach the grapheme to the phoneme, we want them to read it back. Mal. And I would follow the same scope and sequence for my spelling as I would for my decoding. Teaching phoneme awareness as a basic skill to improve spelling is so important for our students. Phoneme awareness tasks may include activities that promote recognition or discrimination of specific sounds within words. Kids can benefit also from cross-linguistic transfer and the use of cognates and morphemes. So as I explained, that abacus not only is just for practice of segmenting, but it is extremely important for spelling. But what about spelling assessment? These are two quotes that I have drawn to remind us that the purpose of a spelling dictation or une dictée is not just to give a number to their spelling abilities, but it's to look for familiar patterns or mistakes, regular repeated mistakes they're making to help us inform our instruction. So if students are consistently spelling le son wa avec la lettre W, we want to go back and we want to practice that particular phoneme. Takeaway number 5, strong fluency does not guarantee comprehension for our L2s. There has been a lot of talk and a lot of focus, and rightly so, on reading fluency, particularly the oral language, the oral fluency assessment, the ORF. So when we're using the oral reading fluency assessment for our second language learners, we may find that they are reading at an appropriate rate, they're reading words accurately, but they're still not comprehending the text. And so we want to take a look at what the research says when it comes to oral reading fluency and its a relationship with comprehension for our second language learners. It is mentioned on page 91. It is important to understand that although weak fluency can certainly impede understanding of the text being read, fluent reading does not guarantee comprehension. It is a much stronger correlation with our monolingual learners who already have that strong bank of vocabulary words or that large lexicon. When the students start reading fluently in their home language, they are going to be able to attach meaning far more easily than students who are decoding words that are unfamiliar to them and that are not yet in their mental dictionary. Research has shown that effective instruction techniques for monolingual learners are also effective for second language learners. However, adaptations or enhancements to the techniques are often required to promote second language fluency development. And this next quote is particularly important. It says that given that second language learners have less well-developed oral language skills than monolingual learners, the importance of building these skills will necessarily affect reading fluency. So again, coming back to the importance of that oral language at the beginning. We want to build their bank of vocabulary words. We want to be able to, they need that foundation. They need those foundational oral language skills because it is going to greatly impact their reading fluency as well as their reading comprehension. So how do we do that? Several studies have found that partner reading is especially beneficial for second language learners because it allows them the opportunity to engage in linguistically complex interaction with a fluent model, to hear and practice appropriate prosody. Now that comes straight out of Dr. Cardenas-Hagan's book. And this is a reading strategy that is strongly researched by Dr. Matthew Burns. And so in my classroom, we use something called a partner reading script or template. Using a book, often it's a decodable book. I've got one here, Chaque Animal Parle. I would have a stronger, more fluent French reader, such as the reader on the left, read with a student who is less fluent, the same text. The stronger, more fluent reader is going to read the passage first. After reading the passage as fluently as possible, the less fluent reader is going to read the same passage as fluently as possible, having heard it modeled for them. If a mistake is made with decoding or not stopping at punctuation, if an error is made, the partners have a script that we have practiced and rehearsed and that they are going to stop and draw that student's attention to an error that was made. So this is a research-based, evidence-based strategy that has been shown to develop students' reading fluency far more effectively than many other practices, including silent reading, where students are not forced to read aloud. And in fact, as we know now, silent reading really does only benefit those students who can already decode. Students who cannot decode are not going to benefit from silent reading, and what it may do is increase the gap between the strong readers and the less strong or weak readers. Fluency includes three components. Reading fluency is reading with accuracy, reading those words correctly and accurately. But reading fluency also includes reading at an appropriate rate. When I say appropriate rate, not too slowly, because if students are reading too slowly, they most likely are still spending a lot of their mental energy trying to decode those words, trying to figure out how to blend those sounds together, or what is that letter sound correspondence. But we also want to make sure students aren't reading too quickly. It's not a race. If students are reading too quickly, they're not taking time to stop and check for meaning. And the goal of reading is to read for comprehension. So we need to find that sweet spot. And one of the strategies to help with reading fluency has been heavily researched by Dr. Tim Rosinski, and it's a strategy called phrasing. And phrasing helps with reading prosody or expression. When we are reading aloud, we want to be reading at a similar pace and at a similar rate and with similar prosody that we would speak. Otherwise, it will be very monotone. I have a tendency to speak with a lot of expression, just by nature. But we want to show students that we want to help guide them from reading word by word to reading with expression and with that correct phrasing. So in Dr. Cardenas-Hagan's book, she says, helping struggling readers learn to read in phrases has been suggested as a way to improve fluency and overall reading proficiency. Furthermore, instruction that incorporates a focus on the prosodic features of the text being read has also been shown to be a valuable component of interventions with struggling readers. Now, I was in contact with Dr. Rosinski, and he has a wonderful rubric for reading prosody, for the prosody component of reading fluency. And he gave me permission to translate that into French. So there is a link on these slides so that you have access to that rubric as well. This is a strategy called echo reading. Research has shown that echo reading with a fluent adult model, again, it's modeled, can improve accuracy rates on familiar passages. This is one strategy I did in my class. Again, I was using a decodable book. This one happened to be from Scholastic, but any decodable book that your students can read. What you want to do is build like pyramids. Show them how to scoop those phrases and how to add some punctuation and to take a look at that punctuation. I'm losing my word. Looking at that punctuation and respecting that punctuation and knowing what to do at that punctuation. So one way that I do that, I took a fairly complex sentence from this particular decodable book and I broke it up into parts, into phrases. And so we worked on that. And I actually timed the students as well. I timed them on their first read before doing this repeated reading, the echo reading and with the phrasing. And then I timed them after doing the echo reading with me. I would say it, they would repeat it. I would say it, they would repeat it. And after even 5 minutes of this intervention, all students in my reading remediation group improved. All right, so this is our 6th takeaway. Explicit vocabulary instruction is essential. Text comprehension is facilitated when 85 to 90% of words are known in a paragraph or text. This is an amazing piece of data because it reminds us of the importance of building those vocabulary words early on and how students rely on those vocabulary words in their lexicon mental dictionary in order to understand more complex text. We need to make sure that we are teaching vocabulary across all subject areas. These are 2 images that I took from a grade 6 French immersion class at my school. Beginning in September, Lisa Frappier, who is the grade 5-6 teacher at my school, started every math lesson with explicit vocabulary instruction. She said she has seen a significant improvement in students' math scores as a result of focusing on vocabulary, what many teachers don't understand and may not spend enough time doing is teaching the vocabulary that is necessary to access the content in that subject area. So by pre-teaching essential words, having the students use the words, interact with the words, see the words and what their meaning is, helped them better understand that math concept and consequently helped improve their overall math achievement. Integration is another vocabulary strategy. Strategic integration in vocabulary implies thoughtful sequencing of instructional tasks as opposed to isolated word meanings. So we want to embed our vocabulary instruction in the content area. This is an area of research of Dr. Natalie Wexler as well. We don't want to just have lists of random words. that are not going to have much meaning. We will increase the meaning if it's embedded in the context. And this, I didn't realize the date was on here. This obviously is about 2 years ago when I was teaching a social studies lesson to grade ones. It was really difficult to talk about communities and your home if you didn't have the necessary vocabulary words to describe the parts of your home and in your community. So we want to make sure that we are pre-teaching those vocabulary words across all subject areas. I'm going to go through this quickly. Read alouds are also a primary instructional approach. And so again, we want to be teaching the vocabulary words necessary, not just in our literacy lessons, but this is an example of how I really focused on the vocabulary necessary in a read aloud class that I used in visual arts. And then after the read aloud, students made art similar to Barbara Reed. Cognates are another wonderful strategy to help build students' vocabulary. Cognates can serve as an important semantic resource for children learning a second language. They rely on students' knowledge of their first language and make connections to words in their second language. In my class, we brainstormed a list of words that are very similar in French and in English. What students didn't realize was that many words in English are actually borrowed from the French language. So this helps to build their understanding of word meanings. And then finally, comprehending comprehension for our second language learners. Although second language learners often acquire foundational word reading skills, a breakdown in reading comprehension sometimes occurs due to an underdeveloped knowledge base and vocabulary base. So this is an example of a student in grade 2 reading a very, very simple decodable book. He was able to read the story. He was able to decode the words. He was able to sound like a fairly fluent reader. But he didn't understand many of the words, such as mal. So if you don't understand those vocabulary words, it's going to greatly affect your comprehension. For me, one of the most magical moments in teaching is when students are decoding a word. Today in the kindergarten class, students were decoding a very simple word, sac, S-A-C, S-A-C. And a student piped up, "Oh, madame, c'est comme sac à dos." And he hears the word, "Vas-y pour ton sac à dos tous les jours." And so he heard that word and made that association with his oral language skills. So that was pretty magical because he now understands that those printed symbols actually represent something that he's familiar with. Summarizing is a reading comprehension strategy that is strongly supported by reading research. Summarizing is a process in which a reader synthesizes the important ideas in a text. Teaching students to summarize helps them generate main ideas, connect central ideas, eliminate redundant and unnecessary information. I have a wonderful infographic here by Lee Fettis and Nellie Caruso, who translated or adapted this from Pam Kastner's Wakelet Connect collection. And I just gonna have one more thing that I want to address before we wrap up, if that's okay. Questioning is another research-based strategy that requires students to ask questions before they read, and that activates prior knowledge. Questioning during reading and modeling that. So as we are reading aloud to our students, modeling how normalizing, questioning while we're reading. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire ce mot? Ou qu'est-ce que tu penses va passer après ça? So making those predictions during reading. I want to leave you with some next steps, and I know I'm cutting it very, very close to 8 o'clock, but I want to leave you with some next steps. These are all resources that will help you do a deeper dive into some of Dr. Cardenas-Hagan's work. The first is, of course, the webinar that OMLTA hosted 2 weeks ago. Here is the link. If you have not found access to the link, it's embedded here in this slide. I also highly recommend, if you are an FSL teacher, that you buy this book. It is an excellent evidence-based resource that can easily be adapted for French second language learners. And finally, listen to her episode with Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. The link is there, and she has an excellent 1-hour interview, and she talks very much about that reading research that we can apply to our FSL students as well. And I always encourage people to not do this alone. I know that everyone sort of feels maybe that they're in silos, or maybe feels that they're doing things a little bit differently, or don't know how to embrace the reading research. It's a lot more fun when you're doing it with friends and colleagues. So you can start a school-wide book study on her book, or even a podcast discussion after listening to the podcast. And I want to just finish with a quote that Dr. Cardenas-Hagan has in the very beginning in her prologue. She said, "We each have a goal in mind, and that is to ensure that every second language learner becomes literate and is thus able to achieve his or her own dreams." And I really liked that, because I really do feel like that is why we do the work we're doing. And we want our students to be bilingual. We want our students to be biliterate. And hopefully some of these strategies will help get your students to where they need to be. Huge thank you. Merci.
Thank you so much. And I know time was flying, and I was like, wait, I know that there's so much more, and I was so excited to hear everything. And thank you so much for the really practical strategies that you shared. I love that not only did you, give the theoretical piece, but telling us how you incorporate it in your practice and the impact that it's had. Thank you so much. I know there's been some questions about the slide. I know the slides. I know we are sharing the recording. We will connect with Kim about possibly sharing a PDF of the slides with the participants, but we can talk about that. And we do have some other slides. I know Amy was going to join us, and I see all sorts of great notes, Kim, in the chat box. So just a lot of grateful people for your time and knowledge and enthusiasm too. I know that's one thing I love about listening to you the few times that I've had the opportunity to do so. So I know that we're switching over to Amy's slides here. So please share any feedback that you have with us in our survey. So there is a QR code there. I'm also going to add the link in our chat box. Your voice is really important, and not only that, helps inspire us to be able to pursue additional opportunities for ministry funding. So thank you so much for that. Amy, if you can flip slides on me. And also, I know we're pretty excited. We have a wheel of names for one prize winner for this evening for Indigo. So Amy, if you wanted to do that, thank you. And
is it showing the right screen? I'm sorry, I can't.
Yes, you are. You're showing the right screen.
Okay, here we go.
I thought it stopped there for a minute. I was gonna yell out a name, but then I know sometimes it'll actually do it for us, that part. Oh, Sarah P. And Sarah, if you could please email omlta@omlta.org, and we will connect you with that prize. So that's omlta@omlta.org, and we will let her know. Sarah, if you wouldn't mind giving us your full name, even if you want to stay on the line after, and we can do that just so we make sure that the right person gets the right prize. And also wanted to share with you that we have our one-page wonders. If this is kind of new to you and you just want to dig into it a little bit more and find out, we do have our one-page wonders available. And also some upcoming sessions with Jordan Sloan and I, looking at literacy foundations for language learners, structuring your literacy block, and responsive literacy instruction. So that's a weekly event, again, 1 hour each day, and we do hope to have some time for some Q&A and some real networking throughout that time. So yeah, that will be an opportunity for us to share some practice that's happening. And again, we want to on veut remercier le ministère de l'Éducation pour son soutien financier dans l'élaboration de ce projet. Alors, merci beaucoup tout le monde et j'espère que vous passez une belle soirée. So thank you very much to all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Angeline, and thank you, Amy.